I'm just gonna be debunking this because, well, it's slightly inaccurate, and then I'm gonna go over the other more refined quote-unquote version. No hate, just I feel
Hello
like
folks,
this
it is me,
sort of
Atari Agent B. In
misinformation or
today's video, we're going to
misinterpretation
have a very
should be
interesting topic
discussed.
on why infinite speed is greater than immeasurable speed.
So, just off the bat, I should let you know the actual definitions of infinite and immeasurable speed. Infinite speed is the ability to move any infinite amount of space, like any infinite amount of space within a finite amount of time. Let's say the universe is infinite and you cross from one edge to the other. You would have infinite speed. It doesn't matter how long it took you, as long as it was a finite amount of time, you would have infinite speed. Immeasurable speed is, well, this. Basically, immeasurable speed is being able to move so fast that you can move through time. With that, you're about to see where this guy delineates from the not truth so much as the more accurate interpretation. Let's play this.
And today, to really get started in this discussion, we're going to go ahead and give a visual example to explain why. So let's begin. We have white and we have black. So we're going to go ahead and discuss their speed. For the sake of this demonstration, white is going to move 100 kilometers per hour and black is going to move 50 kilometers per hour. Now, in this example, we're going to have them race 100 kilometers. Now, generally, it would take white an hour and black 2 hours. So it's very obvious who would win the race if they ever had one. This is the very basic principle of speed. Now, in this example, let's say black goes into the fourth dimension, and he's able to leap in and outside of the general 3D space. So obviously, he's going...
Okay, so... time, or not time, space, like 4D, that's not a dimension. It's not like, you can't say that I went to the fourth dimension. You can say you went into a fourth dimensional location, like, but like, this isn't exactly how it is, because think of it like this: they're vectors, directions. I've explained this before in the higher dimensions and infinity videos, but there is length, width, and height in our world. Those aren't dimensions. Like, you can't go to the dimension of width or the dimension of height. Those are directions. Like, directions that our matter / existence exists in. The fourth dimension is not a location. It's a direction. The higher dimensions are directions like that. There's an author, Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. I think his books and novels get that right, with whole directions and dimensions being the same thing. But yeah, the fourth dimension is not a location; it's a direction. It's often called hypervolume. I'm gonna let this continue.
Going to have a clear victory over white because he doesn't need to worry about time based on the distance he...
Oh, okay. This took a turn. Uh, golly. The fourth dimension isn't time. Big shock, but I'm not sure where this whole idea of time being the fourth dimension is from. But time isn't the fourth dimension, because there is a fourth dimension and fourth dimensional objects. Fourth dimensional objects like 4D cubes, tesseracts, and then in physics it's like hyperspace is what it's called, where it's this higher dimension that we can enter, or beings could hypothetically enter and exit. But the fourth dimension isn't time. I'm not exactly an expert in general relativity or Einstein's work, but it'll tell you, if you look into it, that no, the fourth dimension isn't time. Time is a property or aspect of space, and depending on how fast you're moving in space, time will move relative to that. I'm certain you could literally just look up Neil deGrasse Tyson explaining this. But if you're moving at 99% the speed of light, time is not going to operate the same for you. It might be a day for you, but it could be hundreds of years on Earth. I can't remember the exact amount of time on Earth, but it would be way longer on Earth because you're moving faster. So time, your perception of time or how time operates for you is different. Time is an aspect or property of space. There can be space without time, but there cannot be time without space.
He covers. Funny enough, by the time White shows back up, he's utterly shocked. This is an example of time skip based speeds.
Time skip? What? I'm confused, but I'm gonna let him continue.
On time hacks. When you skip time, you're able to...
Time hacks wouldn't count for speed, would they? That's the same reason teleportation doesn't.
Give the illusion of infinite speed, like hit. Hit is not...
He hasn't defined what infinite speed is.
Actually faster than Goku.
He
could skip time. He seemed like he was faster. And Goku had to shatter his limits and actually break the threshold of Planck time in order to...
Planck time, and Hit was as fast as Goku. I'm not sure where he's getting the idea that he wasn't. So Hit's time skip is him entering his realm, and then time being quote unquote stored there. And he can bring other people in here. So that's a time-based hack. That's time hacks. But Hit is relative to Goku in speed. We know Hit's durability is relative to Goku because he was taking hits from him. And your durability and strength and speed are all relative. Vegeta himself says if he got stronger, would he not have gotten faster, even in DBZ? So Hit was relative to Goku, stronger than him at that time even, and Goku had to use Kaioken in order to contend with Hit and then eventually surpass him strength-wise.
To meet Hit where he was at, meaning Goku was moving infinite speed. And we know this is true because as Hit...
Goku was moving infinite... Okay, nope, just let him go on.
Has said before, time has stopped for everyone except us, showing that Hit is literally moving at what we think is infinite speed.
No. If time stopped for everyone but them, they're in their own form of time, and Hit would have to scale to Goku in speed. Broke down your own logic there, but okay.
Though he's really just controlling time itself to give the illusion to any lower dimensional.
He's not controlling time itself. He's manipulating time. Well, not even manipulating time. His realm can quote-unquote store time, which I think would go along the lines of, correct me if I'm wrong, his realm can momentarily have the time, or has this time, for how long he pauses the world. And then, when he's done moving and whatnot, the time resumes in the regular world, and that time will have passed. I'm not exactly sure how to explain Hit's powers, as I haven't watched Dragon Ball Super in a while. But suffice to say, this isn't looking too good. And Hit isn't a higher dimensional being. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be interacting with Goku on this 3-dimensional level.
he's moving at infinite speed. Now let's even the playing field. Let's say white and black are both in the fourth dimensional time thread.
Time thread? I mean, I'm not even sure how that makes sense, because... No, I'm just gonna let him play it. Yeah.
Well, surprisingly, nothing would actually change. This is because they're now on even playing fields, and white would still hold the superior speed. But what happened?
How would they hold the same speed if... Bro, what? Still hasn't explained the measurable and infinite speed, definition-wise, so I'm waiting for that. But if they were to hypothetically be in this higher dimensional realm, both of them, well, even still, speed should work like this. It doesn't matter if you can move in higher dimensions, it's still a direction. So, like, you can go 50 directions forward and then turn around and go 50 directions left. You know? Your speed isn't changed based on the direction. However, if you're crossing something like hypervolume, like a space that was not space, but like an area of hypervolume, then you could say that the speeds are different, but their speed should still be the same, and time should be too, because time should be working the same in this other dimension, or at least there should be a form of time, and if they're still going off kilometers per hour and whatnot, the time would be the same in this other dimension, no? Anyhow.
If we were to take these same characters and let them leave outside of...
Here's a problem. What happens with the 6th dimension, and the 7th dimension, and the 8th dimension, and infinitely onward and upward? Are you just gonna say all of those dimensions are outside of time? This is the problem. Time is not a dimension. Time is an aspect of space.
Time and space. And in general, we call this the 5th dimension. This is the interesting...
My question is, who is we? My bad.
In space. And in general, we call this the 5th dimension. This is the interesting portion because it goes into what immeasurable speed is. Speed is distance over time, and without...
Immeasurable speed. As I explained to you guys, immeasurable speed is being able to move so fast that you arrived before you left, moving backwards in time. So it would be as if distance, 40, is being divided over -2. You got there before you even left.
Distance, and without time, then you're going to have nothing to measure.
That's not where measurable speed comes from, name-wise. And, this is not a immeasurable speed. Speed where you move across infinite space within 0 time. I forgot. But, I'm pretty sure it's called... Okay, we'll just go over here to the explanation. God, jeez Louise. I hate these types of websites. So, inaccessible speed is... I'm pretty sure inaccessible speed is moving infinite space or finite space with 0 time. I don't know how. I momentarily forgot that, but that's what this guy's talking about. He should be saying inaccessible speed, not immeasurable.
Thus, immeasurable speed. Therefore, even in the 4th dimension, black would utterly lose to white by an infinite degree.
An infinite degree? Nah.
And this is the true essence of immeasurable speed. The ability to not have
I
anything
don't
to
get this
measure
guy's
who you
math
are or what your speed
or
is.
logic.
And that's why Jiren had the power to transcend time itself.
Jiren did not transcend time itself. This probably deserves a debunk video in and of itself. But Jiren, how do I put this nicely? Oh yeah, he broke out of the time trap of hit, which is a time hex, which shouldn't scale to all of time. He broke out of it. He didn't straight up transcend the concept of time itself. Think about context here, people. They're not fighting in a realm with time or space. She's referring to Hit and his time cage and Jiren. Not that hard to understand. This does deserve a debunk video in and of itself, but gotta run up those likes.
According to Vados. And no, just because you age doesn't mean your abilities and combat strengths can't transcend time. Now let's talk about infinite speed.
Okay, the whole aging thing is true. That's true. That's a fact.
This buddy here is going to be named Rick because he kind of looks like him. And Rick has infinite speed, which therefore he can thus stalemate these characters because regardless of distance, it doesn't matter to him. His speed is infinite, and this didn't matter even when he was in the third dimension.
Okay, explain this to me. How can a higher dimensional object move slower than a... No. Let me rephrase that. This guy has infinite speed. Okay. So, let's say he does have infinite speed. Or he can cross infinite speed within an hour, which is what it's saying. These guys are straight up outside of time. Well, this guy's outside of time, so I'm not sure how the guy in the fifth dimension, quote unquote, is going to necessarily even participate. And if he could, then by default, he would have been beyond time and space because he'd need a ridiculous level of speed in order to move outside. I'm getting a headache from this. If you're outside of time, then how are you going to do a race with finite speed? Think about that. But suffice to say, this is not even the right terminology for 4D and 5D, but even still.
Especially not when he's in the fourth dimension, because in the fourth dimension, his speed would be infinitely greater than the 50 kilometers per hour that Black can travel. And if he was outside of time, then he'd definitely still have the infinite distance and differences between him and White's speed of 100 kilometers per hour. And as you can see, this is a very underrated trope. Most people don't realize that in life.
So this isn't a popular opinion or agreed upon. No.
A lot of the characters they think are extremely fast and immeasurable are only that way because they transcend space-time or some other dimension that's arbitrary. But they're...
Yeah, it's arbitrary to transcend space and time as concepts or something. Anyways.
Base stats and speed aren't truly infinite. Now, is it possible to bypass infinite speed? Well, yes. If it's not the monolithical infinity, you can actually have an Aleph Null.
Monolithic? No one was thinking that. And second off, Aleph Null is the lowest level of infinity. That's the one that everyone's normally talking about when they refer to infinite speed. Think of it like this. So set theory basically says there are multiple levels of infinity. Aleph Null is the lowest level. It would be including, let's say, every odd number. Okay, that there are an infinite amount of odd numbers. That's an infinity. But the whole numbers would be would encompass that, and then rational numbers would encompass that by several levels. So whole numbers would be aleph 1, and then etc., etc. I'm not exactly an expert in set theory, mostly because I forgot about most of it, but I do know a guy who's an expert with it. And suffice to say, aleph null would be what this Rick guy should be using, not what this whoever character's gonna be using. I don't remember her name, if he's even said it yet.
Higher infinity, which can theoretically surpass the other infinity of Rick. In this case, we'll call this lady Lola, and as you could see, she...
Lola. No offense to the Lolas out here, but unusual naming and random naming aside, what is this? This is contradiction incarnate. This
exist on this...
Don't play. How can you exist outside of time and then have a higher level of time? You still exist within time then, just a higher version of it. Not that the sixth dimension would encompass such.
A sixth-dimensional realm, a higher dimension of time, and therefore, in this perspective, 6D is considered to be infinite.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're basically... No, hear me out. By this logic, if the sixth dimension is the higher level of time, and the fifth dimension is outside of our time, according to this guy, and the fourth dimension is time, and the third dimension is our world, what's the second dimension? Is it just that every even number dimension is a form or variant of time? We know that's definitely not the case. All the more reason that this is a very faulty model.
Greater than 5D. Thus, as a temporal complexity, it definitely opens up the room to more different possibilities of higher temporal speeds. And as you can see from the list here, immeasurable speed is just something that can't...
Complex infinite speed? Oh dear. And then irrelevant speed is outside of the concept of dimensions, not outside just dimensions.
Can't be measured. It's not truly greater than infinite speed or timeless speed. And timeless speed is just time manipulation, to be honest.
That's not speed then. There is no such... Oh my gosh.
With you. They're only considered greater because most of the infinite speed feats occur in the third dimension, since the third dimension gives us distance and time, allowing us to...
I thought you said the fourth dimension was time, buddy.
Measure the speed. But if any of those beings were to transcend to a higher dimension with the timeless or immeasurable beings, they'd likely be far faster, since their infinite speed would stagnantly increase along. And of course, this principle is limited to the fact that higher dimensional complexities of a 3D dimension could hold so much more infinity that an infinite 2D component is absolute zero or nothing.
Bro, pulling out an Umaneko scan. You don't even have to do this. Just talk to my boy Tyler from the Imaginary Axis. He can hook you up with a perfect explanation of higher dimensions. I mean, the Minger sponge stuff is accurate, but an Umaneko scan? Seriously? That's just me hating on Umaneko, low-key, but there are a myriad of sources superior to this. But it does show that, similar to his argument and this evidence, it's fictional. But I'm gonna stop now.
In that 3D world, kind of like the Mangier sponge mentioned in Umineko.
What do you mean in Umaneko? The Minger sponges existed as a concept before Umaneko. I hate to tell you guys that. Actually I don't. I'm not gonna lie.
And yes, there are beings who have transcended many different altitudes of infinity, like the Speed Force Transcenders.
No.
Like Cosmic Armor Superman.
No.
And Mandrill.
He doesn't understand DC. Similarly, the speed force is omnipresent throughout the entirety of the Omniverse. If you read DC the book, no, they literally have a book. At this point, guidebooks and some guide stuff. But if you read into that, you'll know. So clearly doesn't understand DC scaling, but not. Well, that is actually relevant, but not gonna talk about that right now.
Who are fighting at such a high level of infinite speed, the infinite speed that Flash has might as well be a standstill. And there you have it. This is why infinite speed is technically greater than immeasurable speed. And I hope these speed-based principles...
I love how he says technically.
...will help you guys in further developing which characters are faster on a fictional versus battle that you typically see. And I'll answer this since I know it will be in the comment section below. The principle of irrelevant speed is nothing more but just speed not holding any weight or candle because it is outside of space-time.
Outside the concepts of space-time.
Time, such as an outer-versal being. There is no way.
That's not a good statement, because, like, there can be non-outer-versal beings who have outer-versal levels of speed.
Waiting. There is no time for when it will happen. It just happened because it already has. Typically because that's the principle of outer-versal. No space and no time on an absolute platonic level.
Platonic level? Oh, no. I don't even have the time to start into that. I need to watch this boys part 2.
But nonetheless, this has been Atari HMB. Be sure to subscribe, like,
and I will admit, I have already watched this video, but I am going to re-watch it. Because at the time that I had watched it, I was partially asleep and not paying attention. Mostly both.
Greetings everyone, it is me, Atari HMB, and today is a video going into even more depth on infinite speed, and why I said it's technically
more inaccurate depth, but whatever.
Faster than immeasurable speed. Now at the same time, I want to keep this concise, yet very detailed compared to the last video we did before. And I'm going to be going over the tiering system, specifically on how we can introduce newer categories in order to somewhat help differentiate and keep it a lot more understandable when we're mentioning these different feats. And I'll go over into examples as to why I'm doing this in the first place. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Now, as we stated in the last video, we know that speed is distance over time. However, I think the problem that may have occurred as to why people think infinite speed is inferior to immeasurable speed has to do with how they're interpreting infinite speed. Because the way I interpret infinite speed is under a...
What do you mean interpret? If there's one definition that's already been made, you're not making any interpretations, you're just making up your own definition, not an interpretation.
Completely different theory than what the versus battle and majority of other individuals do. So allow me to explain what I mean by that theory. Now you see, typically people like to record things via Planck time because
Planck time
is generally the unit of measurement of how long it takes for a photon to particularly move. Thus, the speed of light thus comes in the interpretation. However, Planck time is more so the lowest recorded.
Planck.
My boy, it's Planck time.
Measurement of time and not the actual absolute lowest of measurable time, just the most that we've recorded and will assert that can be done. However, when you use...
Huh?
The categories the Versus Battle Wiki uses, which sometimes ignores relativity for the sake of fiction, you have to account for the fact that the uncountable infinity, such as 0.00000, etc., how long does that go on to until we get to the smallest unit or measurement of time? It's an infinitesimal amount. Because
no.
Because of that, we can't necessarily say that infinite speed is being able to move anywhere within a certain amount of time. To give you an example, the Versus Battle Wiki believes that infinite speed is able to travel anywhere instantly or move an infinite distance within a finite amount of time. Teleportation does not count. And so, when you really look at it that way, is it actually infinite speed? Well, I'll tell you this, it wasn't the infinite speed I was talking about. Now you...
Bro, who cares about that type of speed? Let me explain some simple math. Anything divided... Okay, we have infinity, okay? Now divide it by any number. 2. What's half of infinity? Still infinity. Of course, making such an argument / statement gets paradoxical. But suffice to say, dividing infinity, just dividing out of null, it's still infinity. There's still an infinite amount. If I can cross, let's say your house and my house are infinitely apart. If I cross that time within even just a trillion years, I still crossed an infinite space within a finite amount of time. So any finite amount of space would in turn be traversable by me instantly, because I could cross an infinite amount of space within a finite amount of time. Does that make sense?
You might be wondering, what do you mean infinite speed you weren't talking about? There's only one definition, right?
There is.
Well, not necessarily. In fact, theoretically, infinite speed should be able to move an infinite distance in 0 time.
No.
You see, that definition of infinite speed is something else. That's why
we call it inaccessible speed.
I said true infinite speed. And I'll go ahead and give you
an
example
implying that
of
the other
what
definitions
I mean.
are false.
This is White. He's able to move an infinite distance, but of course, within a finite frame of time. However small that time frame may be, he still was able to move infinite distance, but at the cost of being some level of infinitesimal amount of time. Now, this is Black. Black is able to move a finite or infinite amount of distance within 0 time.
Black has superior speed, but go on.
Yes, 0 time. There's no infinitesimal amount or anything about it. It's completely at 0. And the amount of the uncountable infinity it takes to get to there is essentially going to be 0 regardless. Because at this level of speed, he could pretty much travel the same distance White did, but go back and forth and beat White at 0 time. This is true infinite speed. The way...
Once again, this implies that the current definition, which everybody in the power scaling community has agreed to and uses, is false. The reason that what I'm saying right now isn't a argumentum ad populum is because, unlike an argument, words, like definitions like that, have already been agreed upon in specific contexts and whatnot. So if 5 billion people say that the word infinite means without any finite aspect, or if 5 of 7 billion people say speed is distance divided by time, and then like 14 people say no, speed is what the Flash is, well, who's right? The 5 billion people who have made a society and have a definition of the word, as well as a collection of all of these words, or the 14 people who are just in their own fantasy? You get the idea. but I'm gonna let him continue.
I was going about it in the definition of the last video. And the point I want to make with this speed is that it takes absolutely zero time, and even some calculators kind of give you the same aspect or notion of that. Of course, this is theoretical, as some other people will have different interpretations, but utilizing this theory, it creates somewhat of a paradox when it comes to other speeds, such as how would this look to a higher dimensional being? Well, as you could see, the higher dimensional being will probably view them as nothing or not moving at all.
A higher dimensional being still operates on the same amount of time. I don't. He's talking about higher in, as in, like, I'm not sure what he means by higher dimensional actually. But a higher dimensional being, let's say there's another being who exists in the fourth dimension, they'd be able to see any part of our three-dimensional world. And they'd also be able to see stuff like, they'd be able to see how much three-dimensional space we cover within a certain amount of time. Like, they'd see, oh, they covered this amount of space. A higher dimensional being isn't just viewing you in slow motion or still. It's still the same time in the same. It's still space there. It's still space and therefore still time.
But when they look at the present timeline, they can see that this guy can technically cover every space and point in the entire universe, all within zero time. Even if someone like SDEF were to freeze time, it may have the appearance to be infinite speed to a, well, regular 3.
If I freeze time, and then I'm moving in the time that I've frozen, you're not gonna see the speed, I hate to tell you.
Dimensional being because she completely froze all of space-time. However, to a being with this level of infinite speed, these level of time hacks wouldn't even work, not because they're just hacks, but in general, his speed is so fast that even if things were marched down to zero, he would still be able to cover pretty much any point in distance that he needs to within zero time.
If you stop time, it's not zero. Wouldn't it be something like null, where it's not even interacting? Like, think of it like this. It takes you 5 seconds to run from point A to point B. I freeze time. Even if someone who takes 0 seconds, the time still, it's not there, but like it's 0. There's still a value there. It's a placeholder value, yes, but it's still there. So no matter who you are, unless you have a measurable speed, as in speed as in you can move backwards, I don't think you'd be able to move in frozen time.
It creates a paradoxical question more than anything, rather than giving a true defined answer. It's kind of the same paradoxical point you get to when you're trying to find out the difference between infinite dimensional.
Okay, maybe I should correct myself or rethink this. So he basically just said someone freezes time. That means there is no time. But they don't scale to that. So that means anyone who's no, I have to think about this. But yeah, if you can move like speed wise and time and whatnot, well, here's the thing. Even though you've frozen time, you don't scale to that. Like, you're still moving in that time and whatnot. So, yeah, like I said, you'd need immeasurable speed.
Down, you need, rather, you get a low outer versal beam to find out the difference between infinite dimensional or a low outer versal being. Is there really that much of a difference in AP when you break down the fact that infinity at this point really that much of a difference in AP or a low outer versal being? Is there a difference between infinite dimensional or a low outer versal?
Low outer versal. You mean base outer versal, but I'll let that slide. But suffice to say, an outer versal being transcends the concepts of space and time, so there is no level of infinite dimensions. There is no level of dimensionality that will ever equate to or be of relevance to a quote-unquote low outer versal being. The more accurate term is base outer versal, but don't really care about the calling of an outer versal being so much as the fact that you cannot scale to a outer versal being because they transcend the concept of space and time that you are bound by or exist in or are relative to.
So being, is there really that much of a difference in AP when you break down the fact that infinity at this point keeps transcending itself because an infinite dimensional being is infinitely greater than an infinite dimensional being, and so on and so forth, because no.
Let me read this. Though you could argue an outer versal being could destroy two subsets of infinite dimensions from two separate. Whoa! Beyonder is not base outer versal, and subsets. No, you transcend any concept of dimension. So any set of infinity, like it, even if you were in Marlowe's cardinal, if that's how many dimensions you had, you still wouldn't scale because you're a dimensional being. It's kind of preposterous, but whatever.
No matter how much you divide their power, it will always be infinite. Even 1% of this speed is still infinite. But if you use the versus battle definition, 1% of that speed, though it may be infinite, could just increase the finite amount of time they traveled. For example, if a character can move somewhere at 1 second but travel infinite distance, well, what happens if we deal with that by 10% lower their speed? In theory,
how do you 10% lower the speed? The speed is the distance divided by time, right? Infinity divided by 1 is still infinity. You can't lower their speed.
Would it really decrease their speed at all? Well, based on saying it's a finite amount of time, what if you just say that, well, that would mean it would take them 1.1 second. So if they can still be impacted by finite numbers, it's not a level of true infinite speed. As a result, I'd like to say that this speed category that I'm speaking of is something I would categorize or use a buzzword as infinite speed plus. That's because it is a level of infinite speed, but it is interpreted completely different under the assumption that it takes 0 time. Now, this is not to be confused with inaccessible speed alone. Rather, this is a level of speed that grants you a lot of abilities by proxy. Basically, because you could be at any point in the entire universe at any time, and you could pretty much move anywhere within 0 seconds, so regardless if someone freezes time, you will automatically have that inaccessible speed based on just the fact that you are true infinite speed. And the way I like to look at it is this: because infinity, more than often not, breaks mathematics. So, of course, it will break the mathematic formula most people like to use. Now, this part I want to break down, but keep it relatively simple. Immeasurable speed is very simple. It's basically the ability to not measure speed because there really is no distance or no time to really measure. Thus, you can't really have any way to actually come to a proper conclusion. But I do want to say I'd like to see if we had two types of immeasurable speed. The reason I'm saying this is because there are a lot of characters who fit the bill for immeasurable speed, because there are a lot of characters who have went beyond space-time and have been able to do it relatively easily. Infinite Zamasu is one of those people, but you see, because an immeasurable speed being will typically treat a temporal timeline as if it's relatively spatial and walk along the axis, and because
walk along the axis, I don't know where this nonsense is coming from. Once again, we've gone over this. Time is not a direction.
Higher dimensionality just allows different ranges of motion. It's more so a state of being rather than a flat out superior level of speed. I mean, it's only superior in the aspect of how it views the lower dimensions from its perspective. But again, this is even applicable to even levels of attack potency. Take, for example, Kuwabara. Though his dimensional sword doesn't have the range, it can technically hurt a regular 3A universal being, because no matter how good their durability is, he just bypasses all of that by cutting the strings or the dimensions itself in general. But again, this is more so of a shortcut.
I'm not too sure about Kuwabara's sword. Haven't watched Yu Yu Hakusho in a while either. Also don't really power scale it, or didn't really, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to check into that. But I'm not exactly sure if his scaling's right there.
Rather than the actual raw attack potency by itself required to actually do damage. Same thing when it comes to immeasurable speed. It's more so of a shortcut by leaping outside of time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that being.
That's not speed then. Is that really speed? Like, I'm confused now, because speed, distance divided by time. Then there's infinite speed, distance, or infinite distance divided by finite time. Inaccessible speed, infinite distance divided by zero time. Then there's immeasurable, infinite, or just any amount of distance divided by zero, or not zero, a negative amount of time. You arrived before you even got there. So, I'm not sure where this whole immeasurable plus nonsense is, but yeah.
Has any more special speed categories above the lower realm, especially if you hit the infinite speed plus, which, as we can see in this image with Hit, for example, he could skip time and therefore can technically move infinite speed in a 3D level because he can get somewhere. But when he returns back, his actual speed is nowhere near even close to the speed he can cheat with time skip. As you can see, time manipulation is essentially cheating speed, and immeasurable speed in
time manipulation's cheating speed. Interesting. Let's see if he what's the word? Fails to apply to this definition later on in the video.
In a sense, it's kind of the same thing. Of course, if we're comparing it to a three-dimensional plane only. Of course, higher dimensional beings have higher ranges of motion, and thus, if there are higher temporalities, that is when their speeds will be greater. Thus, the category immeasurable speed plus. A being like this could travel back and forth in time, but...
Okay, I'm confused now, but I'm gonna let him speak.
But instead of just being able to travel back and forth in time like a normal immeasurable speed being will doing, the way I look at it is an immeasurable plus speed being can travel eternity, which is infinite time, going to...
Can't immeasurable speed beings already do that? I'm genuinely asking. That's the definition of immeasurable speed, right? Or at the very least, that's the definition of irrelevant speed, where like space and time become irrelevant as concepts to you. But yeah, just use irrelevant speed at this point. Arguably immeasurable speed.
Any point of time and space, or even bypassing it. You want another example? Let's look at when Trunks and the others were traveling in the time machine. Of course, they were able to have a small conversation during time travel. It wasn't immediately instant. And thus, although their infinite speed compared to anyone else existing in the timelines, once they were outside of the timeline, of course, there was, I guess you could say, some higher temporality of...
Need proof of that. Dragon Ball doesn't have higher temporal dimensions. They have infinite timelines, yeah, but like higher temporal dimensions isn't quite something I've seen them prove yet. Unlike places like DC and Marvel.
But compared to the beings who within no time at all could get to the edge of eternity, meaning they can get to the exact end of time, because eternity is essentially outside of time. They could step on the edge of all of eternity, which is the infinite ending of time. And that may also include the beginning. This is immeasurable speed plus, in my opinion, and I think it's very important to differentiate the difference between the two because, like I've said, there are many characters who can cheat and technically activate immeasurable speed, but they themselves aren't necessarily faster. And by doing this, it gives us a level of
they're not immeasurable speed then.
Different hierarchies to kind of understand what types of immeasurable speed these characters have, and whether or not they're really accessing these speeds through sheer speed and ability alone and transcendency, or if they're really just transcending and that's it. By the same definition, that's like assuming 5D being can automatically be 5D plus or multiverse plus, when in reality, being able to go outside of time doesn't mean you can necessarily destroy every single probability plane and infinite parallel world within itself.
I'm not even sure where you got that from. I'm not gonna lie.
That's not that at all. But essentially, the way I look at it is this. Infinite speed is pretty much the versus battle definition and what many others agree to. Same with inaccessible. Immeasurable speed will stay the same because it pretty much grants you accessibility to negative time, being able to travel back in time, and move forward in time, and pretty much free range around the timeline. Okay. Infinite speed doesn't have the same range of motion and freedom that immeasurable speed has, but infinite speed plus in that category still can access every single point of the universe in zero time, and as well as possibly even travel outside of the universe. But again, it throws into a lot of what if.
Define universe, like our universe or just the subject's universe. Anyways, so far not sounded too bad now.
Questions, and it really gets into a somewhat gray area about what is truly technically faster other than just existing outside of time. I mean, by that definition, it's like, hey, I have infinite speed or infinite strength as a three-dimensional being, but you can only bench press, I don't know, or you're only wall level. But if I put you in a fourth dimensional realm, yeah, you're infinitely stronger than me, but only because you're in the fourth dimensional realm, not because you're necessarily stronger than me. Because if I transcend there up with you, I'm still infinitely stronger than you. And that's kind of like what I'm talking about. It's like how you can't say...
Okay. The fact that he's putting up the subtitles, yeah, those ones, yeah, I'll let him slide for this one, for right now.
A 5D being is guaranteed the battle against a lower 3D being. That's not how it always works. There are a lot of how the fiction interprets those about. It's like how you can't say a 5D being is guaranteed the battle against a lower 3D being. That's not how it always works. There are a lot of questions how the fiction interprets those 5D beings, how the fiction interprets those speeds, like Joe Shimomura's light speed being an infinite speed for some reason, but that's just how they work. That's how they interpret it because they use relativity, but not every other fiction uses relativity. Some fictions uses astral planes for the fifth dimension, and some, like DC or Marvel for say.
Why did bro show Goku in the Dragon Ball verse? Nah.
They use relativity, but not every other fiction uses relativity. Some fictions uses astral planes for the fifth dimension, and some, like DC or Marvel for say, use the fifth dimension as something more arbitrary or abstract to some degree. So in that case, we have to really pay attention and look at it from a case.
It's the name fallacy then.
By case basis, but I do think that this list should probably be a little bit more, upgraded or with a little bit more flexibility. By having this flexibility, it allows us to gauge where different characters scale at and doesn't allow us to just automatically give someone the title or category because, oh, I'm immeasurable speed, I'm faster than infinite speed. It's like, not necessarily, because if I can move at any point and anywhere in space, before zero even happens, you can't even freeze me in time, and also I can probably hit you an infinite number of times within 0 seconds as well. There's so many advantages to having that infinite plus speed that people are kind of undermining, and I think it is important to have this level of flexibility when dealing with different fictions with different theories and also different physics and different properties and all. That's the key of having an algorithm. You want to be able to account for other fictions that may have different interpretations. And that's overall why I decided to do this video, to further give an explanation as to why I think what I think, and as well as to introduce a different tiering category or different interpretation about how we may go about speed tiering.
Ultimately, now that I think about it, with the whole time stop thing, just anyone with inaccessible speed ought to be able to move through there. With that, that is the end of our debunk. This is probably one of, I rarely do debunks, but if you guys like this one, I'll do it more. But yeah. Peace.